She had never really had a home, not the kind that feels safe and warm. She had lived in a few foster homes, and while some were kind enough, they were never really hers. There were rules and routines, people who came and went, and she learned quickly that it was easier to stay quiet. Talking too much meant asking for attention she wasn't sure she deserved. Smiling too wide could make someone think she was trying to be noticed. And so, she learned to disappear in plain sight, to blend into the background, and to live quietly, almost like a shadow. She had something, though, something that no one could take away from her. It was the memory of a song. Not a long, complicated one, just a simple melody. She couldn't remember all the words her mother used to sing, but she could hear the tune, in her mind as clearly as if it were playing in the room right now. The melody was soft, gentle, and carried a kind of comfort she couldn't find anywhere else. Sometimes, when everything felt too heavy, too loud, or too lonely, she would hum it quietly to herself. It reminded her of warmth, of love, of the kind of safety she had only known for a little while as a very small child. Her life in the foster home was ordinary, nothing remarkable. Mornings were rushed with cereal that never seemed enough and teachers who barely noticed her. Afternoons were quiet, often spent in the small community center down the street. It was the only place she could go after school without feeling like she had to explain herself. And it was here that she found an old piano tucked in the corner like a forgotten treasure. Its keys were chipped, some were slightly sticky, and the sound it made was far from perfect. But to her, it was the most magical thing she had ever seen. She remembered the first time she sat in front of it. Her small fingers barely reached the keys, and the notes came out uneven, stumbling like little steps in the dark. But as she played even just a few notes of that familiar melody, she felt a strange kind of joy. It was like she was touching a part of herself that no one else could see. She closed her eyes and let her memory guide her fingers. Each note brought a memory of her mother's gentle voice, the smell of her hair, the feeling of being held just long enough to know she was safe. Nobody ever came to watch her play, and she liked it that way. There was no pressure here, no one judging if she hit the wrong key. Sometimes the janitor would pause and smile when he walked past, but he never said much. That was enough. That small piano, that old community center became her world. She could spend hours there, creating her own music. Imagining stories through the notes she played. School was different. It was loud, chaotic, and full of people who didn't notice her. She had friends in the sense that she could answer questions in class or laugh when someone told a joke, but she never really let anyone in. She had learned early that adults and children alike could be unpredictable. Kindness was often temporary. People could leave without warning. She had seen it happen again and again in her life, so she kept her heart guarded. Music, on the other hand, never left. It didn't change. It was hers. One afternoon, the social worker visited the community center, as she sometimes did to check in on the children. Most kids tried to impress her, showing their drawings or bragging about schoolwork. But she noticed something different with this quiet girl. She was sitting at the piano, eyes closed, completely absorbed. The notes were simple, but there was a depth to the way she played. It wasn't about technique or speed. It was about emotion. The social worker stopped at the doorway, quietly watching. She didn't want to interrupt. She had seen many children who had talent, but there was something rare about this one. The melody wasn't complicated, yet it carried a story. Every note seemed to speak of longing, of loss, of hope. It was the kind of music that could make a person stop and listen, even if they weren't used to paying attention. The social worker made a mental note. This child needed more than just guidance. She needed a chance. The girl didn't notice anyone watching. She was entirely focused on the music, letting her fingers follow the memory of her mother's song. Sometimes she would falter, hitting a wrong note, but she didn't stop. She had learned that mistakes didn't matter if the music still spoke from her heart, and in that moment she felt free. For a few minutes, the worries of the world, the foster homes, the teachers, the rules, the endless sense of not belonging disappeared. She was just her, and the piano was hers too. She had never performed for anyone before. The thought had never crossed her mind. Music was private, sacred. But the social worker saw potential. She began to encourage her gently, asking if she would like to participate in a local music program or a small competition. At first, the girl hesitated. She had learned to expect disappointment, and the idea of standing in front of strangers, exposing herself, was terrifying. But there was also a spark inside her, a tiny flame that had been kept alive by her mother's melody. The spark said, "Maybe it's time to try." Every day after school, she practiced. Not because anyone demanded it, but because she wanted to understand the melody fully. She wanted it to be perfect in her own way, not flawless, but real. And slowly something changed. She began to feel stronger, more confident, as if the music had become her voice when she didn't have words. The more she played, the more she realized that this small melody, which seemed so simple, carried everything she had ever felt. It carried her love, her fear, her hope, and her memory of the mother she longed to see again. Evenings were her favorite time. When the center emptied and the sun started to dip behind the buildings, the room would glow in the fading light. She would sit at the piano, the keys cool under her fingers, and play the melody again and again. She imagined her mother listening, perhaps smiling somewhere far away. The thought made her heart ache, but in a good way. It reminded her that love could exist even when people were apart. That some things, like a song, could survive even the hardest times. Her life was far from perfect. She still missed a home, still felt the emptiness that came with losing someone important. But she had found something powerful in her music. It gave her a sense of purpose, a way to express herself without words. It gave her hope that maybe, just maybe, life could change. And deep down she believed that one day, someone would hear her melody and understand her story, even if they had never known her before. This quiet girl, with her small frame and shy eyes, was beginning to discover that she had a gift. Not a flashy one, not something for applause or trophies, but something real. Something that came from the heart. And in a world where she had so little control, music was her way of being seen. Her way of being remembered. Her way of saying without speaking, "I exist, I matter." And so she played. Day after day, note after note, she played for the joy it brought her. She played for the memory of her mother. She played for the first time for herself, fully, without holding anything back. And as the melody filled the empty room, she felt a strange sense of peace. Even in a life filled with uncertainty, even in a world that often overlooked her, she had something that was hers alone, a song, a memory, a voice, and that was enough for now. The day she was told about the music competition, she felt a mix of fear and curiosity she hadn't felt before. A woman from the community center explained it gently, as if she already knew the answer. "It's a small contest," she said. "A chance for children who love music to show their talent. You don't need to worry about winning or losing. Just play what you love." At first, the girl didn't say anything. She wanted to, but the words seemed heavy on her tongue. Competitions were for people who were confident, for children who had practiced for years and had polished performances. She wasn't like that. She didn't have lessons. She didn't have sheets of music filled with notes she could read. All she had was a memory, a melody. And the piano in the corner of the community center, still something inside her stirred. The idea of sharing her song, of letting someone else hear it, was terrifying and exciting at the same time. She had spent so long keeping it secret, like a fragile treasure she carried inside her. And now, for the first time, there was a chance to show it to the world. Slowly, she nodded. The woman smiled and patted her shoulder. "I think people need to hear it. I think you're ready." Over the next few days, she thought about the competition constantly. She walked to the community center, sat at the old piano, and played the melody over and over. Each time she played, she tried to imagine the people in the audience, the judges, the other children. Would they understand her? Would they think it was too simple? She tried not to let her mind wander, but the questions kept coming, making her stomach twist with nervousness. She noticed the other children in the competition were different from her. Some had expensive instruments, polished shoes, and perfect posture. Their music sheets were full of complicated notes, and their teachers had clearly practiced with them for months. Watching them, she felt a flicker of doubt. Could someone like her with only a simple melody really belong here? The fear was real, but it wasn't enough to stop her. She thought about her mother, about the song that had survived even when she had been alone. If she could hold on to that, she could hold on to this too. On the day of the competition, she arrived early. The hall was bigger than anything she had ever seen, filled with lights, chairs, and a stage that looked almost too grand for a child her age. There were cameras and judges and other children practicing their pieces. Everything was polished, shiny, and professional. She clutched the small bag that carried her notebook with the melody she had written down. Afraid that if she dropped it, the music would disappear too. The other children smiled politely, whispered words of encouragement, and adjusted their instruments. She sat quietly in a corner, watching them, feeling invisible as always. But she didn't mind. She didn't need anyone to notice her right now. She only needed the piano and the song. She wanted to remember why she was here, why she had chosen to come, and what this music meant to her. When it was finally her turn, she walked onto the stage slowly. The lights were bright, and for a moment she felt frozen, her hands trembling slightly. She looked at the judges, at the people in the audience, and then at the piano in front of her. It was just a piano, old and simple, and somehow that gave her courage. She sat down, placed her fingers on the keys, and closed her eyes. The first note came out softly. Then the next and the next until the melody flowed naturally. It was not fast or complicated. It was a small, simple tune, the same one her mother had hummed to her so many years ago. But there was something in the way she played it that captured the room. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about speed or complexity. It was about honesty, about emotion, about the story carried in each note. The audience was quiet. Children and adults alike listened without moving, as if the melody itself had the power to pause the world. Even the judges, experienced and serious, leaned forward slightly, paying attention to every pause, every soft note. There was a purity to her music, something that reminded people of their own memories, their own feelings they sometimes forgot to hold on to. As she continued, she imagined her mother listening. The thought made her smile slightly, even though a part of her heart ached. She remembered the warmth of her mother's voice, the comfort it had given her, and she poured that memory into every note. By the time the melody ended, there was a quiet in the hall, a stillness that was almost magical. She opened her eyes, a little surprised that she had finished without stopping. The judges exchanged glances. One of them, a man known for being very serious and difficult to impress, leaned back in his chair, clearly intrigued. He had seen many children play, many technically perfect performances, but this was different. It wasn't about skill alone. It was about the way the music spoke. It was rare, unexpected, and unforgettable. When the audience clapped, she felt a rush of relief and disbelief. The applause was gentle at first, then louder, but she didn't notice much of it. She was still thinking about the melody, about the way it had carried her memories, about the fact that she had finally shared it with the world. Her heart was racing, but it was not fear this time. It was something warmer, something stronger, hope. After the performance, one of the judges approached her. He smiled gently, as if he understood something no one else could. "That was beautiful," he said. "Where did you learn that melody?" She hesitated. She wanted to say it was her mother's, that it was the only thing she remembered from her early childhood. But the words felt too heavy, too fragile. Instead, she whispered softly, "I learned it myself. From a memory." The judge nodded, seemingly satisfied but also thoughtful. He could see that there was a story behind the music, a life behind the performance. He had judged many competitions in his career, but very few children had the kind of presence she had, the way the music seemed to flow naturally, without ego or fear. There was honesty in her playing, a depth that could not be taught. The girl walked off the stage feeling light and heavy at the same time. Light, because she had done something she never thought she could. Heavy, because she realized she had opened a part of herself she had always kept hidden. It was scary, but also freeing. She knew that no matter what happened next, she had given the world a piece of her heart. And that was something no one could take away over the next few days. The competition continued, but she didn't think about winning or losing. She thought about the moment on stage, the way the music had filled the hall, the way it had made her feel closer to her mother. And in quiet moments, when she sat at the piano back at the community center, she played the melody again, imagining the people who had listened. Wondering if they understood even a little of what it meant to her. She also noticed something else. The social worker, who had encouraged her to enter, began talking to her differently. She smiled more often, gave her small nods of approval, and sometimes said things like, "I knew you could do it." That small recognition meant more than any applause, more than any prize. It was proof that someone else saw her, not just the shy, quiet girl, but the one who carried memories, emotions, and a song that was hers alone. Even among the other children, some began to notice her in a new way. They were polite before, but now they looked at her with curiosity, with respect. Not because she was better or faster, but because she had shown something rare, courage. She had stood on a stage, faced a crowd, and played from her heart. And courage, she realized, was more important than skill, more important than applause. That simple melody, once just a memory, had become a bridge. A bridge between her and the people around her, between her past and her future. She didn't know exactly where it would lead, or what opportunities might come from it, but she felt ready to face whatever came next. For the first time, she believed that her music could change something. Not just for her, but maybe for others too, and deep inside, she hoped that someday, somehow, it might even lead her back to her mother. The day of the final performance arrived. She felt a strange mixture of excitement and fear swirling in her stomach. All the children who had participated in the competition before were back, and now the stakes were higher. The hall was larger than ever, filled with chairs that stretched as far as she could see. The stage gleamed under bright lights, and cameras were positioned at every corner. People whispered in the audience, parents chatting nervously, teachers offering last-minute encouragements, and other children stretching their fingers over their instruments. She waited backstage, her small hands gripping the edge of the curtain. She could hear the music from other contestants drifting through the air. Flawless performances, complicated pieces that were fast, technical, precise. Every note seemed practiced 1,000 times. She listened and took a deep breath, reminding herself that she didn't need to play like them. Her music wasn't about speed or complexity. It was about her story, her memory, and the melody that had carried her through the loneliest times. The moment came. She was called to the stage. The applause was polite at first, then louder as the audience realized a new performer was stepping forward. She walked slowly, feeling the wooden floor beneath her feet, the bright lights warming her face. Her heart raced, her fingers tingled, and for a moment she felt like she might collapse. But then she saw the piano waiting for her, old keys gleaming under the lights, and she felt a sense of calm wash over her. This piano had been her friend, her safe place. If she let the music guide her, everything would be all right. She sat down, adjusted her posture, and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, silence. The hall held its breath. And then she began. The first notes were soft, delicate, almost hesitant, like the quiet introduction of a story being told. But soon the melody found its rhythm, flowing gently yet confidently. She closed her eyes, letting her memory of her mother's song guide every movement. The music wasn't complex or flashy, but it had a life of its own. It spoke of love, loss, hope, and resilience all at once. The audience was captivated. There were no dramatic flourishes or sudden surprises, just the purity of the melody and the emotion behind it. Children stopped fidgeting, adults leaned forward in their seats, and even the camera crews seemed to pause as if afraid to disturb the fragile magic in the air. The judges, a panel of experienced musicians and teachers, watched with rapt attention. One of them, known for being extremely critical, leaned forward, a look of surprise on his face. He had seen many talented children, but he had never heard music that could speak so directly to the heart. As she continued, her mind drifted briefly to her mother. She imagined her mother listening from somewhere far away, smiling, maybe even humming along softly. The thought brought a tear to her eye, but she didn't let it stop her. She poured all her feelings into the music, everything she had felt while growing up without a stable home. The loneliness, the longing for someone to understand her, and the memory of the warmth she had once known. Each note was a word, each pause a sentence, telling a story no one else could fully know. The millionaire judge, a man who usually sat with an impassive face, could not take his eyes off her. He had judged hundreds of competitions, heard thousands of performances, and yet this simple melody affected him in a way he had never expected. There was no grand technical skill, no complicated chords or flashy tricks. Just a small child playing a song she had carried in her heart, and yet it was the most moving music he had ever heard. He leaned toward his colleague, whispering something, though the girl didn't hear. He wasn't used to being surprised by children. Most performances were predictable, polished, rehearsed. But this was raw, real, and entirely untrained. It was authenticity in its purest form, and it struck him deeply. He could feel the story behind the notes, the life experiences shaping the way she pressed each key. There was a truth there that could not be faked. When the melody reached its end, there was a moment of silence. The hall seemed to hold its breath, as if no one wanted to disturb the magic. Then, slowly, applause began to rise. At first, it was gentle, hesitant, as if the audience was checking if it was allowed to express such emotion. But then it grew, louder and louder, until the sound filled the room. She opened her eyes, looking around in surprise. People were smiling, some with tears in their eyes, others nodding in quiet admiration. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted them from the keys. The judges called her forward afterward, and she walked toward them, her heart still racing. The millionaire judge stood, extending a hand. His eyes were bright, filled with a mixture of curiosity and astonishment. "Where did you learn that melody?" he asked gently. She hesitated, unsure how to answer. The melody had come from her memory, from her mother, from her own quiet hours at the piano. It wasn't a song anyone had taught her. It was something that lived inside her. Finally, she whispered softly, I learned it from my memory. It's a song my mother used to sing to me." The man nodded, visibly moved. He had heard something familiar in the notes, something that tugged at a memory he hadn't considered in years. He looked at her carefully, his sharp, experienced eyes scanning for details. This was more than talent. It was a story, a life, a truth captured in music. And he realized that finding children like her, rare and genuine, was exactly why he had devoted so much of his life to music competitions. Backstage, after the applause had died down, she felt a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. She had faced her fear and played for an audience she never imagined could care about her music. She had stood in front of a crowd, exposed her feelings, and not only survived but thrived. She realized that music had given her a voice, one that was stronger than any words she had tried to speak in her shy, quiet life. That evening, when she returned to the community center, she sat at the piano again, feeling the familiar keys under her fingers. But this time it was different. She no longer felt invisible. She had been seen, truly seen, by people who mattered, and the idea that her music could touch others, even strangers, gave her hope she had never felt before. She played the melody again, letting it flow freely, feeling it connect her to something bigger than herself, something that could reach beyond the walls of the community center and into the world. She began to understand that her gift was not just about notes or technique. It was about honesty and emotion, about sharing a piece of herself that no one else could replicate. The melody that had once been a secret, a fragile memory, had now become a bridge to people, to experiences, and possibly to opportunities she had never imagined. And deep inside, she held a quiet hope that this performance was just the beginning. Even the other children who had performed began to notice her in a different light. Some approached her afterward, asking quietly about the song she had played. Others smiled as she passed, no longer seeing her as the shy, quiet girl in the corner, but as someone who had done something remarkable. She didn't boast, didn't smile too widely. She just nodded politely, her heart full of a new kind of pride. The millionaire judge lingered longer than most, observing her from a distance. He knew there was something special here, a spark that could not be taught. It wasn't just talent. It was resilience, memory, and heart all wrapped into a small, fragile child who had faced more challenges than most adults could imagine. He made a mental note to follow her journey, to see where this talent and this spirit could lead. That night, as she lay in her bed in the foster home, the melody replayed in her mind. She didn't just hear the notes. She remembered the way the audience had reacted, the way the music had reached people she had never met before. It was a small triumph, yes, but it was also something bigger, a sign that her life could change, that her music could open doors, and that the story she carried in her heart was worth sharing. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to dream. Not in the shy, quiet way she had before, but boldly, imaginatively, as if anything were possible. She imagined her mother hearing the song again, maybe smiling, maybe even finding her. She imagined herself performing for larger audiences, sharing her story through music, and touching lives the way her melody had touched the people in that hall. And somewhere deep inside, a seed of hope was planted. A hope that would grow, slowly but surely, carrying her toward a future she had once thought impossible. After the competition, things began to shift in ways she could never have imagined. The melody she had played, so simple yet so full of meaning, had captured not only the audience but the attention of the Millionaire judge. He couldn't stop thinking about it. There was something familiar about the tune, a haunting sense that he had heard it before, long ago. It was subtle, almost like a whisper in his memory, but it tugged at him with increasing intensity. He had encountered so many musicians over the years, but this melody was different. It carried a story he needed to understand. He requested to meet her again, this time in private. She was nervous at first. She wasn't used to adults giving her this kind of attention, adults who weren't her social worker or teachers. But when he spoke, his voice was kind, calm, and encouraging. "That melody," he said gently, "it's very familiar to me. Can you tell me more about it?" She hesitated. For years, she had kept the song to herself. It was private, sacred. It was the only memory she had of her mother, the only thing that reminded her of love when the world had often been harsh and lonely. Yet something in his tone made her feel safe enough to speak. Slowly, she explained how she had remembered it from her earliest childhood, how her mother used to hum it softly whenever she felt scared or sad. She described the hours she had spent at the community center, learning it by heart, letting it guide her through the loneliness of foster homes. As she spoke, the judge's expression grew more serious. He listened carefully, nodding occasionally, as if piecing together a puzzle he hadn't realized he was still trying to solve. Then he asked softly, "Do you know where your mother is?" Her heart skipped a beat. She had thought about her mother every day, dreamed about finding her, but she had almost no idea where she might be. I don't know," she whispered. "I only know she loved me once. I think she tried to come back, but I don't know. I've always wondered if she's still alive." The judge leaned back, thoughtful. Something about her story stirred memories he hadn't revisited in years. Years ago, he had sponsored a young woman who had shown incredible musical talent, someone struggling with life's difficulties but full of promise. He had helped her with opportunities, connections, and encouragement. He had lost touch with her when her life became complicated, and he had assumed she had moved on. But now, hearing this melody, recognizing it note by note, a realization hit him. This could be her daughter. He immediately began looking into her background, quietly and carefully. He spoke with the social worker, asking about the girl's early life, her mother, and any connections that might exist. Slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. Records confirmed that the girl's mother had been in the city years ago, struggling with illness and financial hardship, and had been separated from her child during a hospital stay. No one had meant for them to be apart forever, but circumstances had intervened, leaving both mother and daughter alone, longing, and unaware of the other's survival. When he finally brought the evidence to her, the girl couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her mother was alive. She had never abandoned her intentionally. She had been struggling, just as she had always imagined, trapped in a situation that had kept them apart. The thought was overwhelming. For years, she had carried feelings of loss, of being unloved, of being forgotten. And now, suddenly, the possibility of finding her mother felt real. The judge arranged a meeting. He wanted to ensure it was safe, supportive, and gentle, not just a sudden, shocking reunion. The girl was nervous, her stomach filled with butterflies, a mixture of hope and fear. What if her mother didn't remember her? What if things had changed too much? But as she approached the small room where her mother waited, she felt a trembling excitement. The door opened, and her mother stood there. For a moment, neither spoke. The years melted away in a single, fragile heartbeat. Her mother's eyes filled with tears, and the girl felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. "It's you?" her mother whispered, voice trembling. "I thought I had lost you forever." Tears ran down the girl's cheeks as she stepped forward, wrapping her arms around her mother. It was a hug full of longing, of years of missed time, of unspoken fears, and finally the relief of reunion. She could feel her mother's heartbeat, hear her shaky breathing, and know that this woman had always loved her. The years of separation, the pain, the loneliness, they were all real, but so was this moment. They sat together, holding hands, talking slowly at first. Her mother explained the circumstances that had separated them, the hospital stays, the poverty, and the fear that she might never see her daughter again. The girl listened, absorbing each word, sometimes nodding, sometimes reaching for her mother's hand. She had imagined this moment for years, and it was even more powerful than she had hoped. Over the next few days, they spent time reconnecting. They laughed at small memories, cried over lost years, and began to share stories about their lives apart. The girl told her mother about the piano, about the melody she had remembered, and how it had carried her through loneliness. Her mother listened, overwhelmed, realizing that the song she had once hummed to her child had survived against all odds. She was amazed that her daughter had held on to it, preserved it, and now shared it with such grace and emotion. The judge watched from a distance, quietly supporting them, ensuring that everything proceeded smoothly. He felt a deep satisfaction knowing that his involvement had helped bring mother and daughter together. It was more than talent he had discovered in the girl. It was the connection that could change lives. And now, seeing the reunion, he understood the full depth of what had been at stake. The girl's life began to shift in subtle ways. Her mother's presence brought a sense of stability and warmth she had never known. They began rebuilding their relationship, learning each other's habits, favorite foods, and small quirks. The mother even started encouraging her daughter to pursue music further, helping her practice, listening to her play, and offering guidance in ways that were gentle and loving. For the first time, she felt truly supported, not just as a talented musician, but as a child who deserved care, attention, and love. The judge continued to mentor her as well, providing opportunities, resources, and guidance for her musical education. But more importantly, he offered encouragement, helping her understand that talent alone was not enough. It was resilience, passion, and honesty that made her music special. He reminded her that the melody she had played, simple as it was, had already changed lives, hers, her mother's, and the hearts of those who had heard it. As the days passed, the girl realized that the melody that had once been her secret treasure was now a symbol of hope, love, and connection. It had survived years of separation, loneliness, and uncertainty, and it had led her to her mother. She played it often now, sometimes with tears in her eyes, sometimes with laughter, but always with a sense of gratitude. She understood that music had given her a voice, and now it had given her a family as well. Her mother, too, found healing in their reunion. She had lived with guilt and worry for years, unsure if her child had survived or if she had been forgotten. Now, holding her daughter close, seeing the young woman she had grown into, she felt relief and joy she could hardly put into words. She realized that the song she had once hummed had bridged the gap between them. Carrying her love across time and distance, the judge continued to observe their progress, quietly proud of the role he had played. He knew that life had challenges that even money and influence couldn't always fix. But sometimes, small acts of encouragement, noticing talent, listening carefully, could create moments that changed everything. And this reunion was proof that even the simplest melody could carry extraordinary meaning, connecting hearts and rewriting destinies. Through it all, the girl began to dream again. Not just of music, but of life. She imagined performing on stages large and small, sharing her story through the notes she played, and touching the hearts of others. The way her melody had touched hers and her mother's, she imagined a future where her mother was always there, supporting her, laughing with her, and helping her navigate the world. And she knew that no matter what happened, she had something inside her that could never be taken away, the memory of love. The melody of hope and the courage to follow it, this part of her life, which had once been filled with silence and longing, was now full of voices, laughter, and music. The melody that had survived years of uncertainty had brought her back to her family, back to herself, and forward into a future full of possibilities. And as she played the song once more, she felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the past had led her to this moment, and that her life, though still unfolding, was full of hope, love, and the power of music. The days after the reunion felt like a dream, one she never wanted to wake up from. Everything had changed so quickly: her life, her relationship with her mother, and even her future. It was as though the world had shifted on its axis, giving her a chance to see things from a new perspective, one where hope, love, and music all seemed within reach. She spent the following weeks with her mother, learning about the years they had spent apart. There was a lot to catch up on: memories of when she was a baby, her mother's hopes and dreams for her, and stories about the hardships they had both endured. Slowly, the girl began to realize how strong her mother was, how much she had fought just to survive. Never knowing if she would be able to find her daughter again, they started doing simple things together. They spent afternoons walking in the park, talking about things that didn't seem important before but now meant everything: what kind of music her mother liked, what her favorite meals were, how they had both learned to live without each other. These moments of connection, though quiet and unremarkable to anyone else, were priceless to them. As the weeks passed, her mother encouraged her to keep playing the piano. "Don't stop playing," she would say with a smile. "That melody is more than just a song. It's a part of you." The girl had never heard her mother say something like that before. It wasn't just encouragement, it was a belief that her music had meaning, that it could take her places she had never imagined. The girl began to practice more, but this time it wasn't because she had to. It was because she wanted to. For the first time in her life, she felt free when she sat at the piano. There was no pressure, no fear that she wasn't good enough. It was just her, the music, and the connection to something deeper inside her. At the same time, the judge who had helped bring them together kept in touch. He checked on her progress, asked about her practice sessions, and offered advice on how to improve. He knew she was talented, but he also knew there was more to her than just the music. He saw the way she carried herself now, with confidence, with pride. He had seen something in her from the beginning, and he knew that her potential was far beyond what she even realized. One afternoon, he called her into his office. She was nervous but excited. She had no idea what he wanted to talk about. When she walked in, he was sitting at his desk, papers and files spread out in front of him. He looked up and smiled at her. "I've been thinking a lot about you," he said, "and about your future." She sat down, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" she asked. He leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "I think you have something special, something that can take you places. Not just as a musician, but as a person with a story to tell. You've already shared that story with the world in your performance, and I think it's time to take the next step." Her eyes widened. "What kind of next step?" He paused, then reached for a folder and slid it across the desk to her. "I've been in contact with a music school," he explained. "They offer scholarships to young, promising musicians. They're interested in you." For a moment, the words didn't make sense. A scholarship? For her? She had never considered something like that before. She had always thought her life would be one of struggle, of small dreams. But now, suddenly, there was the possibility of something much bigger. She looked down at the folder in her hands, feeling both overwhelmed and excited. The judge continued. "They saw your performance and want to offer you the chance to study music. If you accept, they'll provide the funding for everything. You'll have the opportunity to learn from some of the best musicians in the world." Her mind was racing. She had never dreamed of something like this. She had always thought of herself as just an ordinary girl with no way of breaking out of the cycle of uncertainty she had known all her life. But now it seemed like the door was wide open. She could step through it and everything could change, but there was still a part of her that hesitated. The thought of leaving her mother, of stepping into a world that felt so different from everything she had known, was scary. She had just reunited with her mother after all these years. The idea of leaving her behind, even for something as wonderful as this, felt wrong. The judge seemed to sense her hesitation. "I know this is a big decision," he said, his voice soft. "But think of what it could mean for you, for your future. Your mother will always be there for you, no matter where you are. This is your chance to grow, to learn, and to become the musician you were always meant to be. It's an opportunity that could change your life." The girl looked at him, then at the folder in her hands. She had always been afraid of change, afraid that taking a step forward meant leaving something important behind. But in that moment she realized something. She didn't have to choose between her mother and her dreams. She could have both. She could be with her mother and still pursue the music she loved. "I'll do it," she said, her voice trembling with excitement and a little bit of fear. "I'll accept the scholarship." The judge smiled. "I knew you would," he said. "This is just the beginning. You have so much potential, and I believe in you." And so her new journey began. The next few months were a whirlwind of preparations, getting ready to leave, sorting through paperwork, and making the arrangements for her move to the music school. It was all exciting, but it was also a bit scary. She had never imagined that she would have this kind of future. Her mother, though, was supportive every step of the way. "I'm so proud of you," she said one evening as they packed her things. "This is your time to shine. You've always had the talent. Now you'll have the chance to make it real." As the day to leave approached, she felt a mix of emotions. She was excited about the new opportunities, but she was also nervous. The music school was far from home, and she would be away from her mother for the first time in months. But every time she thought about it, she also thought of the promise she had made to herself, to keep moving forward, to keep chasing her dreams. When she arrived at the music school, it felt like stepping into a new world. The campus was beautiful, full of old buildings, wide open spaces, and a sense of history. Everywhere she looked, there were people playing instruments, talking about music, and discussing their latest compositions. She felt a little out of place at first, like she didn't belong. But as soon as she stepped into the practice room and sat at the piano, she remembered what had gotten her there, the music, the melody, the hope that had carried her all the way. She started taking lessons, working with some of the most talented instructors she had ever met. They pushed her, taught her new techniques, and opened her eyes to things she had never known before. The world of music was much larger than she had ever imagined, and it was both thrilling and overwhelming. But through it all, she never forgot her roots. She never forgot the melody that had started it all, the song her mother had once sung to her. Every time she sat down to practice, she played that melody first. It was her way of connecting with her past, with the part of herself that had always carried her through difficult times. It reminded her that no matter how far she went, no matter how much she learned, she would always be the same girl who had once played for an audience that didn't expect her to succeed. And that, she realized, was what made her music so special. As the months passed, her confidence grew. She started performing in recitals, and each time she played, the audience responded. Her music spoke to them, just as it had spoken to the judges and to her mother. It wasn't about perfection. It was about emotion, connection, and truth. And slowly but surely, people began to take notice. In the end, she realized that the journey she had started was never really just about the competition or the scholarship or even the music school. It was about discovering who she was, finding the courage to step into the world, and trusting that she could follow her dreams no matter what. And with her mother's support and the love she carried in her heart, she knew there was nothing she couldn't achieve. Her life, once uncertain and full of fear, was now filled with promise. She had the future she had always dreamed of and the courage to face whatever challenges came her way.